Case 1. Marjorie Deal Armstrong and William Rothstein. It's a humid August afternoon in Erie, Pennsylvania. A man sits cross-legged on the hot asphalt of a parking lot, his hands cuffed behind his back. Around his neck is a heavy metal collar, and it's emitting a steady, rhythmic sound. He looks at the state troopers, his voice shaking. "It's going to go off. I'm not lying. Why isn't anybody trying to get this thing off me?" Welcome to Cold Read Crimes. Today, we're opening the vault on 10 investigations that didn't just shock the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. They changed how authorities understand complex criminal behavior and the length some individuals will go to carry out their plans. Our first case takes us to the shores of Lake Erie for an incident the FBI once described as one of the most unusual and complicated in its history. Before we break this down, I've got a quick question for you. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city and state in the comments. It's always fascinating seeing how far these stories reach. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. We're diving deep into cases that challenge what we think we know about crime, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. The date was August 28, 2003. It started like any other shift at Mamma Mia's Pizzeria. At 1:30 in the afternoon, a call came in for a delivery, 2 large pizzas to be dropped off at a remote location near a TV transmission tower at the end of a quiet road on Peach Street. The man who took the call was 46-year-old Brian Wells. He had worked as a delivery driver for years, known as a quiet, routine-oriented individual. But when Wells arrived at that location, events took a turn that would place him at the center of one of the most puzzling criminal cases in modern history. According to investigators, he encountered a group waiting for him. What followed involved coercion and the placement of a metal device around his neck, something that would later become central to the investigation. At 2:30 in the afternoon, Brian Wells entered the PNC Bank at Summit Town Center. He wore a white T-shirt with the word "Guess" written across the front in marker. Beneath it, the outline of the device was noticeable. What stood out immediately was his behavior. He didn't rush. He didn't act erratically. He waited in line like any other customer, even appearing calm as he approached the teller. When it was his turn, he handed over a note requesting a large sum of money and indicated that he was under a strict time constraint. The bank was unable to provide the full amount requested. Wells left with a smaller sum of $8,702 and exited the building without drawing further attention. But this wasn't a typical robbery. Authorities later discovered that Wells had been given a set of detailed written instructions, 9 pages, outlining a sequence of locations and tasks. The documents described a complex series of steps he was expected to follow, with the promise that compliance would eventually lead to the device being removed. The instructions created what investigators would later describe as a scavenger hunt, a timed sequence that required precise movement across multiple locations in Erie County. One line in the instructions stood out: "Act now. Think later." Within minutes of leaving the bank, Wells was stopped by police in a nearby parking lot. Officers quickly realized the seriousness of the situation and secured the scene while awaiting specialized assistance. As they assessed the device, the steady sound it emitted became more urgent. At 3:18 in the afternoon, the situation reached a tragic conclusion. In the aftermath, federal investigators began analyzing the device. What they found was not something improvised or simple. It was a complex mechanism, designed in a way that presented significant challenges for anyone attempting to safely disable it. The construction included multiple components intended to complicate any response, as well as misleading elements that could cause confusion during an emergency. Alongside the device, Wells had also been carrying a modified weapon disguised to resemble an everyday object. another detail that reinforced the level of planning involved. The central question became, who had the knowledge and capability to orchestrate something like this? The answer began to emerge from an unexpected source. Less than a month later, a man named William Rothstein contacted authorities with a shocking claim involving an unrelated incident. That lead introduced investigators to Marjorie Diehl Armstrong, a woman known for her intelligence, but also for a long history of instability and legal trouble. As investigators dug deeper, connections between individuals, motives, and planning began to form a clearer picture. According to the prosecution, the motive behind the plan centered on financial gain. There were allegations of a broader scheme involving inheritance and the use of others to carry out key parts of the operation. Rothstein, who had technical skills and a background that matched the complexity of the device, was identified as a key figure in its construction. One of the most critical findings came when federal agents reconstructed the sequence of instructions given to Wells. After analyzing the timing, distances, and required tasks, they reached a sobering conclusion. The plan was not realistically achievable within the time provided. In other words, even if every step had been followed exactly, the outcome may not have changed. This raised a question that still sparks debate today. Was Brian Wells an unwilling participant, or did he believe he was involved in something less dangerous until it was too late? In 2011, Marjorie Diehl Armstrong was convicted on multiple federal charges related to the case and sentenced to life in prison. She died in custody in 2017, maintaining that other individuals were involved. William Rothstein passed away in 2004 before facing trial. Before we move on, I want to hear your take. What time is it where you are right now? And based on everything we've covered, do you think Brian Wells fully understood the situation, or was he placed into something far beyond his control? The Erie pizza bomber case remains one of the most complex investigations in FBI history, a reminder that some of the most dangerous plans are built not on impulse, but on calculation. Now, let's head east into the Pocono Mountains, where a different kind of case would test law enforcement in an entirely new way. Case 2. Eric Matthew Frein. On the night of September 12, 2014, the quiet atmosphere of the Pocono Mountains was disrupted by a targeted attack on the Pennsylvania State Police Barracks in Blooming Grove, Pike County. At approximately 10:50 in the evening, during a routine shift change, Corporal Brian K. Dixon II exited the barracks and was struck by gunfire originating from the surrounding wooded area. As Dixon went down, Trooper Alex Douglas moved in to assist and was also injured in the attack. The individual responsible, later identified as 31-year-old Eric Matthew Frein, had positioned himself at a distance from the barracks and carried out the attack from a concealed location. Prosecutors would later describe the act as deliberate and premeditated, based on the level of planning involved. The investigation advanced rapidly in the days that followed. Within 72 hours, a civilian discovered a 2001 Jeep Cherokee partially submerged in a swamp roughly 2 miles from the scene. Forensic teams processed the vehicle and recovered multiple items that linked it directly to Frein, including personal identification and materials consistent with his presence in the area. Among the most significant findings inside the vehicle was a handwritten notebook. In it, Frein had documented his observations before and during the incident, providing investigators with insight into his mindset and the degree of preparation behind the attack. Combined with forensic evidence recovered later, the notebook became a central component of the case. On September 16th, a criminal complaint was filed, and Frein was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list shortly thereafter. What followed was one of the most extensive manhunts in Pennsylvania history. The search effort ultimately cost approximately $11.9 million and involved nearly 1,000 law enforcement personnel at its peak. Frein, who had experience with outdoor survival techniques and military-style simulations, used the dense terrain of the Poconos to evade capture for several weeks. The operation also exposed gaps in existing safety protocols. During the early phase of the search, not all personnel were equipped with protective gear suited for high-risk environments. This led to immediate concerns and prompted changes that would later improve officer safety in similar operations. To address the challenges posed by the terrain, law enforcement agencies deployed a wide range of resources, including armored vehicles, aerial surveillance, and coordinated public alerts across multiple states. Despite these efforts, Frein remained at large for 7 weeks, occasionally appearing on surveillance systems before moving out of range. As the search continued, investigators examined Frein's background to better understand his motivations. They found that he had a strong interest in military reenactments and had formed a group centered on historical simulation. This interest appeared to influence his behavior during the manhunt. Evidence collected from his residence and personal writings suggested that his actions were driven by deeply held anti-government beliefs. In communications addressed to his family, he described the attack as part of a broader ideological stance rather than a personal dispute. Authorities ultimately classified the case as an act of domestic terrorism. The 48-day search came to an end on October 30th, 2014. Members of the United States Marshal Service located Frein at an abandoned airfield in Tannersville, approximately 20 miles from the original scene. He was taken into custody without further incident and transported back to Pike County. The trial of Eric Frein began in April 2017. Due to extensive media coverage, a jury was selected from another county to ensure impartiality. Prosecutors presented a large body of evidence, including written materials, forensic findings, and witness testimony. The defense acknowledged the strength of the evidence, but focused on mitigating factors related to Frein's background. On April 19, 2017, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts, including first-degree murder, attempted murder, terrorism-related charges, weapons-related offenses, and reckless endangerment. On April 27, 2017, the jury recommended a sentence of death. While that sentence remains in place, it has not been carried out due to an ongoing statewide moratorium. The Blooming Grove case had a lasting impact across Pennsylvania. It led to significant upgrades in law enforcement equipment and reinforced the importance of coordination during large-scale manhunts. For survivors like Trooper Alex Douglas, recovery has been a long and ongoing process, reflecting the lasting consequences of that night. Case 3. The Kids for Cash Scandal. In the early 2000s, Pennsylvania's juvenile justice system was widely regarded as a national model. It was built on the principle of balanced and restorative justice, a system designed to guide young offenders toward rehabilitation rather than punishment. But in Luzerne County, within the courtrooms of Wilkes-Barre, that principle was quietly being undermined. Between 2003 and 2008, a scheme unfolded that would later be known as the Kids for Cash scandal, a breach of public trust so severe that it led to the clearing of thousands of juvenile records and major reforms across the state. At the center of the investigation were 2 judges from the Luzerne County Court of Common Pleas, Mark Ciavarella and Michael Conahan. Ciavarella, who presided over juvenile cases, had built a reputation as a strict enforcer of discipline. He embraced zero-tolerance policies that became common in the years following heightened concerns about school safety nationwide. He often spoke about receiving leniency as a teenager after a minor offense, an experience that helped shape his future. Yet, from the bench, That same leniency was rarely extended to the young people who appeared before him. Behind the scenes, Conahan, serving as president judge, used his administrative authority to shut down the county-run juvenile detention center, citing concerns about its condition. This decision created an immediate need for alternative facilities. Two privately operated centers, PA Childcare and Western PA Childcare, quickly filled that gap. These facilities were developed by businessman Robert Miracle and attorney Robert Powell. Federal investigators would later determine that this transition was not purely administrative, but financially motivated. According to court findings, the two judges received approximately $2,600,000 in undisclosed payments in exchange for ensuring that the new facilities remained heavily utilized. The system that followed was both efficient and deeply harmful. To maintain high occupancy rates, a steady flow of juvenile placements was required. Schiavarella's courtroom became the pipeline. Families were frequently encouraged to proceed without legal representation for their children. In many instances, they were told that involving an attorney would unnecessarily complicate minor cases. As a result, a significant percentage of minors appeared in court without counsel. The hearings themselves were often extremely brief. Observers later described them as lacking the safeguards typically expected in a courtroom. Decisions were made quickly, with limited opportunity for defense or context. As a result, many young people were sent to detention facilities for relatively minor infractions, situations that, under normal circumstances, might have been handled through school discipline or community-based interventions. The scale of the impact was substantial. More than 2,500 juveniles were affected, spanning over 6,000 cases. Examples highlighted during the investigation included teenagers placed in detention for creating online parody content, intervening in school conflicts, or engaging in minor household disputes. For many of these youths, the consequences extended far beyond the courtroom. Time spent in detention disrupted education, strained family relationships, and, in some cases, had long-term emotional and psychological effects. The situation began to come to light in 2007 when the Juvenile Law Center, an advocacy organization based in Philadelphia, received a complaint from a parent. The case raised concerns about a child being placed in detention without legal representation for a minor issue. As the organization reviewed additional cases, a clear pattern emerged. Luzerne County showed unusually high rates of juveniles waiving their right to counsel and being placed outside their homes compared to other counties in Pennsylvania. Although early appeals for intervention were unsuccessful, the case gained momentum when federal authorities, including the FBI and IRS, uncovered financial records linking the judges to the private detention centers. The investigation revealed a network of payments routed through intermediary accounts and shell entities. In 2009, federal charges were filed, including racketeering and fraud-related offenses. Michael Conahan later pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 17.5 years in federal prison. Mark Schiavarella chose to go to trial. In 2011, a jury found Schiavarella guilty on multiple counts related to corruption and fraud. He was sentenced to 28 years in prison. Throughout the proceedings, he maintained that his strict approach reflected community expectations. The developers involved in the scheme also entered guilty pleas for their roles in facilitating the financial arrangements. One of the most significant outcomes came from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. In 2009, the court exercised its extraordinary authority to vacate all juvenile adjudications handled by Schiavarella during the affected period. This action resulted in the clearing of records for more than 2,000 individuals, many of whom had carried those records into adulthood. In response to the scandal, the state established the Interbranch Commission on Juvenile Justice to examine how such a system was able to operate unchecked. The Commission's findings led to the passage of Act 123 of 2012, which introduced several key reforms. Minors were guaranteed legal counsel, ensuring that waivers were made only after proper consultation. Restrictions were placed on the use of restraints in juvenile court unless clearly necessary. Oversight and accountability standards within the juvenile justice system were increased. Today, the Luzerne County scandal stands as a defining moment in Pennsylvania's legal history. While it exposed serious institutional failures, it also led to lasting reforms designed to better protect the rights of young people. It remains a powerful example of how oversight, advocacy, and investigative work can correct systemic wrongdoing and strengthen public trust in the justice system. Case 4. Cosmo Dinardo. In July 2017, a series of disappearances in the suburbs of Bucks County, Pennsylvania, triggered a large-scale, multi-agency search that would evolve into one of the most complex criminal investigations in the state's recent history. Over the course of several days, 4 young men, Jimmy Taro, Patrick, Dean Finocchiaro, Mark Sturgis, and Thomas Mayo, were reported missing under concerning circumstances. What initially appeared to be unrelated cases quickly converged into a single investigation centered on a rural property in Solebury Township. The investigation began on July 5, 2017, when 19-year-old Jimmy Taro Patrick did not return home after arranging to meet an acquaintance, 20-year-old Cosmo Dinardo, for what was believed to be a marijuana transaction. When communication with Patrick abruptly stopped, his family alerted authorities. 2 days later, additional concerns arose when Dean Finocchiaro, Mark Sturgis, and Thomas Mayo also went missing within a short time frame. Their sudden disappearance, combined with the lack of communication, prompted law enforcement to treat the situation as a high-priority case. Investigators relied heavily on digital forensics, including cell phone data, to reconstruct the victims' last known movements. This analysis led them to a large property on Lower York Road in Solebury Township, owned by the family of Cosmo Dinardo. Further evidence strengthened this focus when Thomas Mayo's vehicle was located nearby. Personal items of importance remained inside, suggesting he had not left voluntarily. These findings provided the legal basis for search warrants covering the entire property. The search operation that followed was extensive, involving local, state, and federal agencies. Due to the size of the land and environmental conditions, specialized tools such as cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar were used to assist in locating key areas of interest. After several days of coordinated efforts, investigators made a significant discovery on the property. Multiple victims were located in a concealed burial site. Evidence indicated attempts had been made to hide or alter the scene prior to burial. A 4th victim was later recovered from a separate location after further cooperation from one of the suspects. As the investigation progressed, authorities determined that Cosmo Dinardo had arranged meetings with the victims under the pretense of drug transactions. The situation escalated during these encounters, ultimately leading to their deaths. Dinardo was later found to have enlisted the assistance of his cousin, Sean Michael Kratz, in at least part of the events. Statements provided to investigators revealed that financial motives and planned robbery were central factors in the case. The incidents were not random, but rather the result of deliberate actions tied to these arrangements. The legal proceedings that followed resulted in 2 separate outcomes. In May 2018, Cosmo Dinardo pleaded guilty to multiple counts of first-degree murder, along with related charges including conspiracy and robbery. As part of his agreement with prosecutors, he provided information that assisted in recovering all victims. He was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Sean Kratz initially considered a plea agreement, but ultimately chose to proceed to trial. During the 2019 proceedings, prosecutors presented recorded statements and supporting evidence linking him to the case. The defense argued that his actions were influenced by fear and pressure from Dinardo. The jury reached a mixed verdict, finding Kratz guilty of first-degree murder in one count and lesser charges in others. In November 2019, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, along with additional time for related offenses. The Soulbury investigation had a lasting impact on Bucks County and beyond. It demonstrated the critical role of digital tracking in missing persons cases and highlighted the importance of coordinated law enforcement response in large-scale investigations. It also raised broader concerns about illegal activity, networks, and the challenges they present to community safety. Officials noted the case as a key example of how quickly isolated incidents can evolve into complex, multi-victim investigations requiring advanced forensic techniques. For the families involved, the conclusion of the legal process provided a measure of closure after an extended and difficult period. The case remains a significant reference point in Pennsylvania for both investigative strategy and legal coordination in high-profile cases. Case 5. Robert Bowers. On the morning of October 27, 2018, the Squirrel Hill neighborhood of Pittsburgh, long known as a center of Jewish life, became the focus of a tragic and deeply impactful event. The incident took place at the Tree of Life synagogue building, which housed 3 congregations: Tree of Life, or L'Simcha, Dor Hadash, and New Light. At approximately 9:50 a.m., during Shabbat services, Robert Bowers entered the building and initiated an attack. Law enforcement responded within minutes, and a prolonged emergency situation unfolded inside the synagogue. Officers from the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police worked to secure the building while assisting those inside. The situation ended when Bowers was taken into custody after sustaining injuries during the confrontation. The impact of the event was profound. 11 individuals lost their lives, and several others were injured, including responding officers. The victims ranged in age from middle-aged to elderly members of the community, many of whom had gathered for worship and a family ceremony. Statements made by Bowers at the time of arrest indicated a clear bias against the Jewish community. These remarks became a central element in establishing motive during the investigation. Federal authorities, including the FBI, led an extensive investigation that focused heavily on digital evidence. Analysts reviewed Bowers' online activity and identified a pattern of extremist and anti-Semitic content posted on the social media platform Gab. Investigators determined that Bowers had been actively sharing conspiracy-driven narratives and expressing hostility toward Jewish organizations, including the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, which supports refugee assistance programs. A key piece of evidence was a message posted shortly before the attack, which reflected intent and provided insight into Bowers' motivations. This digital trail played a critical role in demonstrating premeditation. Due to the nature of the incident, targeting individuals based on religious identity within a place of worship, the United States Department of Justice pursued federal charges. In 2019, a grand jury returned a 63-count indictment. The charges included hate crimes resulting in death under federal law, obstruction of the free exercise of religion, firearm-related offenses connected to a violent crime, and charges related to injuries sustained by responding officers. Federal prosecutors declined a plea agreement that would have resulted in a life sentence, choosing instead to pursue the most severe penalty available under federal law. The trial began in 2023 in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Pennsylvania. The defense focused on Bowers' mental health, arguing that underlying conditions affected his ability to form intent. Prosecutors countered this argument with expert testimony and medical evaluations, which indicated no significant neurological impairments. They argued that the evidence pointed to deliberate planning and ideological motivation rather than diminished capacity. On June 16, 2023, the jury found Bowers guilty on all counts. During the sentencing phase, the court heard testimony from survivors and family members of the victims. Prosecutors emphasized the calculated nature of the act and statements made by Bowers following the incident. On August 3, 2023, the jury recommended a sentence of death. Bowers was formally sentenced under federal law and transferred to a high-security federal facility. While a federal review of execution protocols remains ongoing, the sentence reflects the severity of the charges. In the aftermath, the case prompted nationwide discussions about security at places of worship. Advocacy organizations, including the Anti-Defamation League, called for expanded funding and resources to improve safety measures. This led to increased support for programs such as the nonprofit Security Grant Program, which assists religious institutions in enhancing their protective infrastructure. Within Pittsburgh, the response from the community was marked by unity and resilience. Interfaith groups came together in support, and the phrase "stronger than hate" became a symbol of solidarity. Plans are underway to redevelop the synagogue site into a space that will include a memorial, educational exhibits, and community facilities. The case also contributed to broader conversations about the role of online platforms in the spread of extremist content. It remains a significant example of how digital evidence can be used to establish motive and intent in federal prosecutions. Today, the Tree of Life case stands as a defining moment in Pennsylvania's legal and social history, highlighting the consequences of hate-driven actions and the importance of community response, legal accountability, and ongoing prevention efforts. Case 6. Charles Edmund Cullen. Charles Edmund Cullen, a registered nurse who worked for 16 years across medical centers in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, is considered by many experts to be one of the most prolific offenders in United States history. While he was formally convicted of 29 murders, his own statements and subsequent investigations suggest the number of victims could be significantly higher. The case, which led to his arrest in December 2003, exposed a deeply concerning lack of accountability within parts of the healthcare system and prompted major reforms in professional reporting laws. Born in 1960 and a veteran of the U.S. Navy, where he served as a missile technician on a nuclear submarine, Cullen entered the nursing profession in 1986. Over the following years, he worked at multiple hospitals and a nursing home. His crimes involved the unauthorized administration of medications, primarily digoxin, insulin, and epinephrine to patients, including individuals who were stable or preparing for discharge. Cullen's method often involved interfering with intravenous fluid supplies. He accessed storage areas and altered medical materials, which were later used by other staff members. Because of this, adverse outcomes did not always occur during his assigned shifts, making detection more difficult. Cullen later claimed he was attempting to relieve suffering, but investigators determined that many affected patients were not in critical condition, contradicting that explanation. Concerns about Cullen's behavior had surfaced repeatedly throughout his career. In 1993, while working at Warren Hospital, he was reviewed in connection with a patient death. In 1998, at Eastern Hospital, medical staff identified unusual lab findings in multiple patients, including unexplained medication levels. Despite these warning signs, Cullen was rarely reported to licensing authorities or law enforcement. Instead, institutions often allowed him to resign quietly or dismissed him for minor policy violations. This pattern enabled him to retain a clean professional record and continue working elsewhere. The investigation gained real momentum in 2003 at Somerset Medical Center in New Jersey. That summer, the New Jersey Poison Information and Education System alerted hospital officials to a troubling pattern of unexplained overdoses, suggesting the possibility of intentional harm by a staff member. Detectives Dan Baldwin and Tim Braun utilized toxicology reports alongside digital forensic analysis to identify a suspect. They examined records from computerized medication systems known as Pyxis units. These logs revealed that Cullen frequently accessed medications not prescribed to his patients. A notable pattern emerged. Requests were initiated and then cancelled immediately, suggesting medications were still being removed despite the digital record showing otherwise. A turning point came when a colleague, ICU nurse Amy Loughran, was approached by investigators. After reviewing the evidence, she agreed to assist. Loughran began reviewing internal records and noticed Cullen accessing files unrelated to his assigned duties. Her cooperation culminated in a monitored meeting at a diner, where she spoke with Cullen while wearing a recording device. Although he did not fully confess during that conversation, his statements provided enough grounds for authorities to proceed. Cullen was arrested on December 12, 2003. Following his arrest, he eventually admitted to multiple offenses, providing information that led to convictions tied to 29 deaths. In 2004, he entered guilty pleas in both New Jersey and Pennsylvania courts. His sentencing proceedings were marked by repeated disruptions. During a 2006 hearing in Pennsylvania, the interruptions became so severe that the judge took steps to ensure the proceedings could continue without further delay. Cullen ultimately received multiple life sentences in both states, ensuring he would remain incarcerated for the rest of his life. The case became a major turning point for patient safety and institutional accountability. Investigators concluded that Cullen's continued employment across multiple facilities was largely due to a reluctance among institutions to report concerns, often out of fear of legal consequences. In response, Pennsylvania and New Jersey enacted the Healthcare Professional Responsibility and Reporting Enhancement Act, commonly referred to as the Cullen Law. This legislation introduced several key reforms. Healthcare professionals and institutions are now required to report credible concerns about unsafe practices to licensing authorities. Organizations are granted legal protection when sharing truthful information about an employee's professional conduct in good faith. Enhanced background screening procedures were also implemented for individuals entering the healthcare field. The Cullen case remains a critical example in forensic toxicology and healthcare oversight. It demonstrated how gaps in communication and accountability can have serious consequences, and it reshaped policies to prioritize transparency and patient safety across. Case 7. The Lex Street Massacre. On December 28, 2000, Philadelphia experienced its largest single mass shooting at the time, occurring on the 800 block of Lex Street in West Philadelphia. The residence was known to local authorities due to prior illegal activity. 10 people were inside the home. 7 tragically lost their lives, while 3 others sustained serious injuries. The investigation into the Lex Street massacre was marked not only by the scale of the incident, but also by early investigative errors that resulted in the wrongful arrest of 4 innocent men before the true perpetrators were identified. The evening unfolded when 4 individuals entered the Lex Street residence. At the time, the victims were gathered inside the first-floor apartment. Forensic reconstructions and survivor testimony later helped investigators piece together the sequence of events. The 7 deceased included Alfred Goodwin, Samuel Harris Jr., George Porter, Edward Sudler, Ronette Abrams, Calvin Helton Jr., and Tyrone Long Jr. 3 residents, Yvette Long, Bruce Carter, and Craig Kilby, survived and were able to provide initial statements to law enforcement. Early reports framed the event as related to a drug war due to the residents' association with illicit substances. This assumption influenced the initial investigation, coupled with pressure to quickly resolve the city's worst mass homicide at the time. In January 2001, 4 men, Jermel Lewis, Sakon Yuk, Hezekiah Thomas, and Quiante Perrin, were arrested based on community tips and eyewitness accounts. Lewis initially provided a statement to police, which he later tried to retract. The 4 men spent 18 months in custody, while evidence continued to be reviewed. Importantly, no physical or forensic evidence connected them to the crime scene. A breakthrough came when Sheehan Black, already in custody for unrelated offenses, began providing detailed information about the Lex Street events. Authorities verified his knowledge of details not publicly released, prompting the district attorney's office to reconsider the case. In 2002, the charges against Lewis, Yuk, Thomas, and Perrin were dismissed. The men later received a collective settlement for wrongful arrest. The investigation ultimately identified the actual perpetrators: Dawood and Khalid Farouki, Sheehan Black, and Bruce Vaney. The attack stemmed from a financial dispute involving a vehicle trade rather than organized crime activity. A disagreement over a car transaction escalated, leading to the tragic incident at Lex Street. The legal proceedings began in 2003. Bruce Vaney, who served as a driver during the incident, entered a plea agreement and testified against the others. Sheehan Black also pleaded guilty, avoiding the possibility of a death sentence. In March 2004, the court issued the following sentences. Dawood Farouki received 7 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Khalid Farouki also received 7 consecutive life terms without parole. Sheehan Black was sentenced to multiple life terms without parole. Bruce Vaney received a sentence of 15 to 30 years in state prison, accounting for his cooperation. The sentences provided some measure of justice for the victims' families, although the initial investigative missteps left lasting impressions on the community. Following the incident, Philadelphia and the Philadelphia Housing Authority undertook urban redevelopment on the 800 block of Lex Street. Dilapidated buildings were removed and replaced with the Lucien E. Blackwell development, a series of 18 modern, accessible homes designed to revitalize the neighborhood. The project incorporated safety features and accessibility standards, transforming the block into a symbol of resilience and renewal. The Lex Street case also prompted reforms within the Philadelphia Police Department and the District Attorney's Office. A 15-year review emphasized the risks of tunnel vision in investigations and the need to corroborate confessions with physical evidence. Changes in procedures included ensuring videotaped custodial interrogations for transparency during homicide interviews, enhanced supervisory oversight during early investigative stages of high-profile cases, and the adoption of double-blind lineup procedures to improve eyewitness identification and reduce errors. The Lex Street massacre remains a landmark in Pennsylvania legal history, highlighting both the consequences of violent disputes and the importance of accurate investigation, community restoration, and systemic improvements. Case 8. Danelo Cavalcante. On August 31, 2023, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania launched a 13-day intensive search operation testing modern fugitive tracking and interagency coordination. The subject of the search was 34-year-old Danelo Cavalcante, a Brazilian national recently sentenced to life without parole. Cavalcante had been convicted weeks earlier for a 2021 homicide in Schuylkill Township. His escape from Chester County Prison in Pocopson Township triggered a massive law enforcement response and placed the local community under heightened alert. The investigation began around 9:50 a.m., though footage showed Cavalcante had exited the facility nearly an hour earlier. The escape was unusual, requiring significant physical skill. Cavalcante used a narrow hallway in the exercise yard, bracing his hands against one wall and feet against the other to climb to the roof. He then maneuvered past perimeter security and disappeared into nearby vegetation. An internal investigation led to the termination of a guard who had a personal cell phone in the observation tower, a direct policy violation. The search focused on the heavily wooded perimeter, but Cavalcante proved elusive, utilizing terrain and available resources to avoid capture. Nearly 500 personnel from Pennsylvania State Police, the U.S. Marshals Service, FBI, and local departments joined the search. Surveillance and confirmed sightings helped track his movements. On September 4th, Longwood Gardens cameras captured Cavalcante with a backpack and light-colored T-shirt. Later, he stole a delivery van from a local dairy farm, traveling north toward Phoenixville. On September 9th, digital doorbell footage in East Pikeland Township showed a clean-shaven Cavalcante wearing a dark cap and green sweatshirt, suggesting access to supplies and clothing. Public concern escalated on September 11th when Cavalcante entered a residential garage. The homeowner fired shots, but Cavalcante evaded capture while taking a firearm from the garage. The situation prompted temporary school closures as the search perimeter tightened. The final phase highlighted modern manhunt capabilities. Tactical teams and investigators used thermal imaging, digital forensics, and coordinated strategy to narrow the search area to roughly 3 by 2.5 miles. On September 13th, aerial units detected a heat signature, and tactical teams moved in with surprise. A Belgian Malinois K9 named Yoda located Cavalcante under a pile of logs, allowing officers to secure him quickly and safely. Cavalcante was returned to a maximum security prison to serve his original life sentence. Additional charges related to the escape and crimes committed during the manhunt were filed. In 2024, he pleaded guilty to multiple counts, including escape, 2 residential burglaries, theft of a vehicle, and firearm offenses. He received an additional 15 to 30 years to be served consecutively. Attorney General Michelle Henry noted that the sentence reflected the disruption to the community and ensured Cavalcante would remain in a high-security facility. The escape prompted a review of prison security, leading to structural upgrades, enclosed exercise yards, and improved monitoring systems. The case is frequently cited for the effective use of crowdsourced digital evidence, with doorbell camera footage aiding real-time tracking. The operation also demonstrated successful interagency cooperation, including coordination with Brazilian authorities regarding Cavalcante's criminal history. The Great Wall escape remains a landmark case in Pennsylvania, showing the effectiveness of modern law enforcement, technology, and coordinated tactics in resolving a high-profile manhunt. Case 9. Ira Einhorn. Ira Einhorn was a prominent figure in Philadelphia's counterculture scene during the 1960s and 70s. Known as the Unicorn, a literal translation of his last name from German, he presented himself as an intellectual guru and claimed to have helped establish the first Earth Day in 1970. His public image as a peace activist and environmentalist made him well known in the city's academic and social circles. However, this persona sharply contrasted with a private life investigators would later describe as controlling and volatile. In 1972, Einhorn began a relationship with Holly Maddox, a former cheerleader and Bryn Mawr College graduate from Tyler, Texas. By the summer of 1977, the relationship was ending. Maddox informed Einhorn she was leaving their shared apartment on Powelton Avenue. On September 9, 1977, Holly Maddox disappeared. When family concerns grew, Einhorn explained that she had left to buy groceries and likely started a new life elsewhere. For the next 18 months, the case remained classified as a missing persons investigation. The investigation changed in late 1978 when residents below Einhorn's apartment reported a persistent, unpleasant odor and a brownish liquid seeping through the ceiling. A roofer was hired to investigate and traced the problem to the rear of Einhorn's apartment. Einhorn refused access to a padlocked closet, prompting police to seek a search warrant. On March 28, 1979, detectives executed the warrant. Behind the padlock, officers discovered boxes of Maddox's belongings and a steamer trunk containing her remains. The keys to both the closet and trunk were found hanging in the hallway. Forensic analysis revealed that Maddox had been enclosed with newspapers, plastic bags, air fresheners, and packing material, which effectively preserved her remains. The autopsy indicated multiple fractures to her face and skull caused by a heavy object. Investigators also uncovered evidence of premeditation, including Einhorn's attempt to purchase a book on mummification in 1978. Despite the discovery, Einhorn was released on bail in May 1979, posting only 10% of the $40,000 security. Days before his trial in 1981, he skipped bail and fled abroad. Over the next 17 years, Einhorn lived under several aliases in countries including England, Ireland, and Sweden. In 1993, a Philadelphia jury convicted Einhorn in absentia of first-degree murder and sentenced him to life. He was apprehended in June 1997 in Champagne-Mouton, France, but extradition proved complicated due to French and European human rights laws. To facilitate his return, Congress and the Pennsylvania legislature passed the Einhorn Law in 1998, ensuring extradited defendants could request a new trial. Einhorn resisted extradition, even attempting self-harm while in custody. On July 20, 2001, he was finally returned to Pennsylvania. His second trial began on September 30, 2002. He testified in his own defense, claiming Maddox had been killed by CIA agents as part of a conspiracy. The prosecution countered with physical evidence and testimony of Einhorn's prior abusive behavior. After a month-long trial, the jury rejected his defense. On October 17, 2002, Einhorn was found guilty of first-degree murder and the following day sentenced to life without parole. He served his sentence in multiple state facilities and died of natural causes on April 3, 2020, at age 79. The case remains notable in Pennsylvania for several reasons. It demonstrated the preservation of evidence through controlled concealment techniques, illustrated how state frameworks can adjust to secure extradition of high-profile fugitives through the Einhorn Law, and brought justice to Holly Maddox's family after a case that had remained open for over 25 years. The Ira Einhorn case is a reminder that time and borders cannot prevent the legal system and forensic science from achieving accountability. Case 10. The Mercersburg Triple Murder. On June 25, 2016, a brutal triple homicide occurred on a rural property in Mercersburg, Franklin County, that exposed the dangerous expansion of Baltimore-based gang networks into the Pennsylvania countryside. The investigation into the deaths of 39-year-old Wendy Ann Cheney, 47-year-old Brandon Cole, and 36-year-old Philip Matthew Jackson revealed a calculated plot of witness retaliation that required 6 years of intensive inter-agency cooperation to fully dismantle. Pennsylvania State Police responded to a reported fire at a property along Welsh Run Road, where they discovered a disturbing scene inside a barn. 3 individuals were found deceased, and forensic evidence indicated that all 3 had been shot, and their remains subsequently set on fire. The victims were Wendy Ann Cheney of Hagerstown, Maryland, Brandon Cole of Fayetteville, Pennsylvania, and the property owner, Philip Matthew Jackson of Mercersburg. The autopsy and forensic reconstruction provided chilling details of the execution. The victims had been bound with zip ties with their hands behind their backs. While Cheney and Cole were shot execution style, investigators determined that Jackson was still alive when the fire was set, having been shot during a desperate confrontation with the assailants inside the barn. The investigation, led by federal authorities and the Pennsylvania State Police, quickly focused on Wendy Cheney's background. Detectives established that Cheney had been in a relationship with two individuals involved in a large-scale heroin and crack cocaine distribution ring, Kevin Coles and Tory White. The primary motive for the killings was retaliation and the protection of the drug trafficking enterprise. Coles, White, and co-defendant Devin Dickerson had learned that Cheney was actively cooperating with federal authorities. Fearing her testimony would dismantle their multi-state operation, they orchestrated a contract killing to ensure her silence. To execute the hit, co-defendants Jarrell Ajibison and Kenyatta Corbett recruited members of the Black Guerrilla family, a notorious Baltimore-based gang. The contract killers were promised a payment of $20,000, which they believed was stored in a safe inside the Jackson barn, along with any drugs or firearms they could locate on the property. While Cheney was the primary target, Cole and Jackson were murdered simply because they were present at the scene and could identify the killers. The resolution of the case took nearly 7 years and resulted in charges against almost a dozen individuals. The complexity of the investigation stemmed from the cross-border nature of the crimes, involving suspects from New York, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. The Black Guerrilla family hitmen traveled from Baltimore to the rural Mercersburg property specifically to fulfill the contract. This highlighted a growing trend in the early 21st century, urban gangs utilizing rural Pennsylvania towns as distribution hubs and safe locations for violent enforcement actions. The recovery of the stolen firearms and the tracking of the $20,000 payment provided the digital and physical evidence necessary for the federal grand jury indictments. The prosecution of those involved in the Mercersburg triple murder concluded with some of the most substantial sentences in the history of the Middle District of Pennsylvania. Other co-defendants, including Devin Dickerson and Kenyatta Corbett, pleaded guilty to related robbery and drug trafficking charges and were sentenced to significant federal prison terms. The Mercersburg case is a landmark for the Pennsylvania State Police and federal prosecutors due to the sheer volume of defendants and the success of the long-term investigation. It remains a primary example of witness tampering by permanent silencing, a crime that the Department of Justice has prioritized in its efforts to protect the integrity of the judicial system. The case also underscored the volatile risks associated with the illicit drug trade in rural areas, leading to increased federal resources for Franklin County and the surrounding regions through programs such as Project Safe Neighborhoods. For the community of Mercersburg, the conclusion of the trial in 2024 provided a final resolution to a crime that had shattered the peace of their rural landscape for nearly a decade. These 10 landmark cases from 2000 to 2025 illustrate how Pennsylvania's justice system has evolved. Investigations increasingly integrate digital forensics, from anti-Semitic posts on Gab in the Tree of Life case to doorbell footage tracking Danelo Cavalcante. Traditional evidence collection is now routinely complemented by digital data, including blueprint analysis and crowdsourced tracking. Legislative reforms have closed gaps exposed by high-profile offenders. The Cullen law mandated reporting of unsafe practices and granted employers immunity. The Einhorn law enabled extradition while ensuring a retrial for defendants convicted in absentia. Act 123 of 2012, reformed juvenile justice, guaranteeing counsel and limiting routine shackling of minors. Law enforcement protocols also improved. The Erie ambush prompted upgrades to body armor, while the Lex Street massacre led to mandatory recording of interrogations and double-blind lineups. These cases serve as both a record of tragedy and a guide for a resilient, transparent justice system, showing that as crime grows more complex, Pennsylvania's legal and forensic frameworks continue to adapt. Thank you for spending this time with Cold Read Crimes. These cases remind us that behind every headline are real people, real consequences, and lessons that continue to shape the justice system today. If this deep dive gave you a new perspective, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And before you go, drop a comment which case stayed with you the most. Until next time, stay aware, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next one.